is the following. I would say that this debate was a monstrosity because there are a number of people on that stage who know the content of the briefing that I've just given you. They know it from Zbigniew Brzezinski in the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committee on February 1st, and they know it in the same way that this Congressman John Oliver knows it, that the plan right now from Bush-Cheney is attack on Iran followed by martial law. They don't talk about it. They should be holding hearings. They should be having oversight. They should be doing something to stop it. But instead, it looks like they're in on it. They are complicit in this, and they will be so held under the Nuremberg Code if we ever get to a moment of reckoning at some point in the future. The only minor sidelight in the debate that I thought had any value was when Gravel pointed out that all of the candidates on the stage, the major ones, are bought and paid for by Wall Street, by hedge funds, and by bankers. That was the one 15-second soundbite of some important truth that came out of it. Otherwise, it was a dismal wasteland. Not one of them is qualified to be president. They're all failures.
Well, that was a mouthful. Yeah. You really don't want that recorded, or that would be okay on a playback?
Sure, that's okay.
Okay, good. I like that part where they asked if the Vietnam War was in vain, and at that moment, you know, optimist that I am, if Edwards had said that all the American soldiers should lay down their arms, that it's a criminal war, that could have been a historic moment, huh?
Joe, let's not record this now, huh?
Okay.
My answer to that is not going to be very complimentary. Area. Well, Osama bin Laden, of course, is, if he's still alive at all, the centerpiece of a troupe of actors, an asset of U.S. and British intelligence from the very time that he came on the scene in the 1980s. And the real issue here is that Cheney had visited Pakistan in the end of February 2007, demanding that Pakistan do the obvious, join in the war on Iran, and Musharraf, the president of Pakistan, has said no. At that point, the destabilization started. The Chief Justice of Pakistan turned against Musharraf, and we've just had a bloodbath at the Red Mosque in the capital city area of the country. So William Crystal, certified neocon fascist madman, tells Fox News that Bush is going to invade Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is a very big deal. If Iraq has about 25 to 30 million people, and Iran is up to about 75 million people, Pakistan has 164 million people, 5 times bigger than Iraq. And if the neocons get their way, the United States will soon be at war in Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, fighting 300 million people with a hollow, logistically weak U.S. force of just 10 divisions. Now let's just, in the concluding minutes here, go through some of the warnings that have been issued. First of all, Republican Congressman, presidential candidate Ron Paul, in an interview with Alex Jones, responding to this kind of an analysis, says, I think we're in grave danger of it. We're in danger in many ways. The attack on our civil liberties at home, a foreign policy that's in a shambles, and a commitment which endangers our troops and our national defense. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under the Reagan administration, says, unless Congress immediately impeaches Bush and Cheney, a year from now the United States could be a dictatorial police state at war with Iran. Bush has now put in place all the necessary measures for dictatorship in the form of executive orders that are triggered whenever Bush declares a national emergency. This is entitled Impeach Now or Face the End of Constitutional Democracy, posted first in Counterpunch, July 16th, 2007. In a radio interview with Tom Hartman of Air America on July 19th, Roberts says, and I'm quoting the summary that appeared in the RIA Novosti news agency, a former Reagan official has issued a public warning that the Bush administration is preparing to orchestrate a staged terrorist attack inside the United States, transform the U.S. into a dictatorship, and launch a war with Iran within a year. Pat Buchanan has also at least asked some important questions. This is in his column, also around the 20th of July. Pat Buchanan's questions include, is the United States provoking a war with Iran to begin while the Congress is conveniently on its August recess? Has Bush secretly authorized covert attacks inside Iran? Well, this we know. The answer is yes. Is this yet another abdication by Congress, read Pelosi, Reid, and Steny Hoyer, of the moral and constitutional duty to decide when and whether America goes to war? Why is Congress going on a vacation? Why is the Democratic-controlled House and Senate leadership not asking these questions in public, in hearings? Why is Congress letting Bush and Cheney decide whether we launch a war in the Middle East, or is Congress in on it? Well, based on what we've heard from John Oliver and Zbigniew Brzezinski, the Democrats are in on it. And we've also had Cindy Sheehan coming to Washington now, declaring her candidacy against Pelosi on the issue of impeachment, where Pelosi has failed absolutely and ought to be ousted as the Speaker of the House. Cindy Sheehan says there's a distinct possibility that we'll be hit with another staged terrorist attack that will allow Bush to enact martial law provisions, continuity of government provisions that he has put in place in his most recent executive orders. We have, in addition, the PKK problem, the Kurdish terrorists operating with U.S. protection and U.S. backing out of northern Iraq. They've been attacking into Iran, but they've also been attacking into Turkey. And we may now be at the point where the patience of the Turks will run out. The Turkish military establishment has got 150,000 troops along that border. If Turkey moves, the Kurds will be crushed in...
We'll actually have a kind of a discussion, although you'd like to get on a roll. I respect that.
No. I think it's probably better to do a little bit of dialogue now.
Okay. Well,
I've had enough of that monologue stuff now.
Okay. Here we go. I was at Philadelphia, and it took my looking at it a couple of minutes ago to feel the full impact of the historic moment that at Philadelphia you had gathered some of our country's minds who were at least in touch with the 9/11 truth, that I don't know what the common denominator was in addition to that, but you got some good people there, and you did have a opportunity to present in a historic location right there by the Liberty Bell the appropriate way America should be thinking, instead of the debate last night, that we have a bunch of painful truths to face as a whole people, and you proposed a way to for America to take back their government, to give you full credit. And I liked your 5 points. You know what I did? I already went ahead and rewrote your 5 points.
That's wonderful. We want to have full participation.
Here's how I put it: that you want a united front to come together on the proposition that we should impeach Bush and Cheney, and in particular, that among the reasons that have already been acknowledged, that the 9/11 truth reason be up there front big time as a way of magnifying the enormity of how bad these guys are. And that truth, you know, as you try to argue with people in the street about 9/11 and they say, no, our government couldn't be that bad. I mean, the other side of the coin, that our government is that bad, that is the flavor of the impeachment plank. And I had a little trouble that the 9/11 is at the end of the 5. So I was trying to combine 1 and 5, which is just, what do you call it, sniping or snipping, or, you know, big deal. That's small talk. Anyhow, the next point that I thought was important was we should end all wars immediately, just bring all the troops home. And while we're at it, we ought to study William Bloom's revelations about how evil the empire's been all along, that all that talk about bringing freedom and democracy here and there is, you know, the opposite of the truth. Do you get excited about William Blum's book too, Webster?
No, I'm afraid my enthusiasm for him is contained, because this is again a left gatekeeper who stubbornly refuses to say anything about 9/11. I had a chance to see him at the Irvine, California conference lately. Can I just propose a different method?
Yes, go for it. Okay.
Maybe we just go back a little bit. I'm Webster Tarpley. I'm not sure if people know the path that you're taking. That's me. So I wanted to say hello. I'm Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., and we're talking about this meeting that was held on July 4th, right, at Philadelphia, across from Independence Hall.
I did leave out the July 4th. That is an important part of it.
And we had some 300 people. We had about 30 organizations. And as you know, Joe, we were trying to respond to the tremendous crisis caused by the massive betrayals of the Democratic Party. And when they were running for office last year, they were broadly hinting that they were going to impeach Bush and Cheney, and they certainly promised that they were going to end the war in Iraq. And they have reneged. They have betrayed their base on those critical issues. And it was already clear to me that we were in a period of party realignment. In other words, every 32, 36, 40 years in this country, there's a crisis of the party system. And sometimes it's neat. Sometimes it's like 1932, when the Republicans turn into the minority and the Democrats become the majority, and it's fairly straightforward, clear cut. But then we've had really messy ones, right, like 1860. And during the 1850s, you have the collapse of the Whigs, you have the rise and fall of the know-nothings, the Free Soilers come along and disappear. The Republicans finally emerge, but that takes a while. And, of course, in that cycle, you had a little matter of a civil war. And we're now in very, very messy party realignment. It could have been a neat one if the Democrats had not betrayed their own base and their own program, but that is what they've done. And that will only get worse, as far as I can see. And therefore, there's a huge crisis, above all among leftists, I would say, in the peace movement, in the impeachment movement, the anti-globalization, too, to some extent, that the Democrats have essentially become useless. The old quotation, useless, feckless, gutless, spineless, clueless, that's the Democratic Party. So we cannot get enthusiastic about the Democratic Party presidential candidates, because not one of them is qualified to be president. They're all totally incompetent, as far as I can see.
You know, Webster, that brings to my mind your fourth plank, which is rule by the people, not by the money interests. And it occurred to me that the political common denominator of what you're saying is that our government has been corrupted by bribery. And we have a language, a culture that sort of excuses it with polite terms. But they have actually all been bought off, and that's the tragedy?
I think that's a very big part of it. That was the only glimmer in this Democratic Party debate that was held on, the 23rd of July, was when old curmudgeon Gravel, who can't say anything reasonable about anything, he can't pull himself together to say anything about 9/11 in particular, and he's got a crazy tax proposal. But be that as it may, he did point out that the Democratic Party frontrunners are bought and paid for, lock, stock, and barrel, by the worst predatory hedge funds, the Locust Fund, the Jackal Fund, the Vulture Fund, supporting Hillary, Obama, and Edwards. It's notorious. So they're all paid for by Wall Street investment bankers, and as Gravel pointed out, that is what they'll do when they're in office, no matter what they say. Follow the money. It's a reasonable proposal. So we have to realize also these people are imperialists. You look at Biden. He is an imperialist. He wants to go into Darfur in Sudan and kill people. Everybody knows what the agenda here is. No Wall Street banker gives a damn about whether Sudanese or Chadian people live or die. They're interested in invading Sudan because they want to cut off the oil to China and increase the pressure on China and try to sabotage China in that way. And that's the whole point of Darfur, is that's a result of U.S., British, Israeli manipulations over many, many years. So it's just typical. I would say if the Democratic Party gets into power, they're going to continue the war in Iraq. Mrs. Clinton has told the New York Times she's going to keep 50 to 60,000 troops in Iraq for the entire historical future, until the cows come home.
Or until the oil runs out.
Until the oil runs out. And she is a warmonger. And if Cheney is able to realize his plan that we've talked about in other broadcasts of pulling off a new fake 9/11, a new false flag terror operation, a super 9/11 with weapons of mass destruction and or a new Gulf of Tonkin, Mrs. Clinton is going to be out there as a cheerleader for that because her instincts are those of a warmonger. There's also the interesting point that because of her status as a woman, she feels that she has to be more aggressive, more of a warmonger than she would be normally. And therefore, this is the analysis from Dick Morris, who's somebody who is a scoundrel himself, but he knows her very, very well. And he points out that in order to burnish her image as a real tough presidential candidate, she's going to continue the Iraq war. It will not end. And that puts us now in this situation that the Democratic Party is totally unusable at the moment for any kind of positive cause. In other words, the common denominator, I think, is just person of goodwill. And if you want to do that, you cannot surrender your autonomy to the Democratic Party, although you may want to go into their primaries because that's the only way to get on the ballot. So the idea is, look, we've got these movements, right? We've got anti-war, impeachment, anti-globalization, labor, civil rights, anti-tax, civil liberties, civil rights, honest elections, and 9/11 truth. And essentially each one of them has had problems. Every one of them is a single-issue movement. And that, of course, is a fatal flaw, as we saw during the Vietnam War. Secondly, they're tied to the Democratic Party. Usually some of them are tied to the Republican Party, and you've got to learn that. And then you've also got the question of a national coalition, a national united front, bringing them all together so they wouldn't be single issue and they wouldn't be tied to one of the existing political parties and with this narrow focus. So that's essentially the idea of the Philadelphia platform. It essentially says we've got to do something now, even though our resources are not great, they're actually minimal, but that we can do something to create the preconditions for a political alternative to the Democratic Party. And on the Republican side, a lot of our libertarian conservative friends have become infatuated with Ron Paul, but I think as time goes on, Ron Paul will, perhaps some of the luster will come off that particular effort, and it'll become obvious that Ron Paul, I'm afraid, really does not have any solutions to the economic breakdown crisis. I mean, his stock in trade is that he's against the New Deal. He's against Franklin D. Roosevelt-style economics. And it just so happens that in the current predicament, a massive dose of New Deal FDR-style economics is the only hope for the survival of human life in this part of the world. So Ron Paul is in a very bad position to do anything to deal with the kind of huge crisis that we see, dollar hyperinflation, and so on. So therefore the idea was to come together in Philadelphia. All of these movements are needed, right? In other words, you couldn't stand up there and say, well, we want to do this, but we don't want to have anybody who's against the war in Iraq. It'd be ridiculous. Or we don't want to have anybody who wants impeachment. Equally ridiculous. Or we don't want to have anybody who's upset about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and what they're doing in the third world, where they managed to kill 40,000 people per day. Couldn't do that either. But just in the same token, you can't do it without 9/11. And of course, 9/11 truth turns out to be, in certain ways, the most indispensable ingredient, because it's the basis of the Bush regime. The Bush regime is a 9/11 September criminals regime, and every time that Bush gives a speech for any of his policies, really, but especially Iraq, it's always explicitly or implicitly premised on 9/11.
Absolutely.
So if you don't have 9/11 truth, you're essentially laboring in vain. You're fighting with both hands tied behind your back.
I agree with you totally, Webster. I was trying to, as you were speaking there, I was wondering if I could throw this one at you. Although you're saying the key word that I jumped on when you elucidate on your own the 5 planks, you talk about deferring the usual stuff that people get hung up on, the Marxist rhetoric or the libertarian rhetoric. Like, let's just discuss that and not get hung up on that. And I agree with you. I salute that idea that I think our country is in for a profound creating a shadow government, a government in waiting, in which we have to face these social issues of what form it could take if, in fact, we did have a government of, for, and by the people. And in particular, the people had some grip on the economic system, as opposed to now the control being in the hands of, less than 1%, that we do need a redistribution of ownership as a basis of a redistribution of control?
Well, maybe redistribution is not exactly the right term. We need a massive increase in production. Right now, there's nothing to distribute. Before wealth can be distributed, it's got to exist. We are in a parasitical country with a $750 billion per year trade deficit. It means that we are sucking $2 billion per day out of the rest of the world in the form of unpaid for goods and services, and we're exchanging that at gunpoint with these countries with these funny little green pieces of paper. Now, I'm going to verge into the area that we've really got to put into brackets, but
go for it.
What we obviously need is a comprehensive rebuilding of the U.S. infrastructure in terms of energy systems, water systems, transportation. We've got electrical grids that are on the point of breakdown every summer, and indeed right now, today, they may be closer to breakdown than anybody wants to know. We've got an airline system that anybody who's been in it knows that it's on the point of breakdown. Our passenger rail, our freight rail are on the point of physical breakdown. The interstate highway system, if you've been on that, is at the point of physical breakdown. The bridges in upstate New York have been falling down now for 20 years. We've had bridges in New York City closed because they were in danger of falling down. So we have got a society that's on the point of thermodynamic, physical breakdown, and we're being told that we've got the best economy in world history. And then we'd have to go on to rebuild. But I think that the general idea, I think a lot of people can agree on the negative side. The problem that we have, and this it's not so new because it's what you had in the 1850s also, is that people don't agree on economics. We have Malthusians. We have people who want to go along with Al Gore and his global warming thesis. All right. We've also got monetarists who want to go along with the libertarian Ron Paul and what he thinks about Milton Friedman and, above all, the Austrian school of von Hayek and von Mises. And then we have people, again, I'm one of them. I'm a New Dealer, so I'm interested in applying what you would call the American system. It is what you see in Governor Winthrop in Massachusetts all the way back in the 1630s and 1640s. Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, Friedrich List, Henry Carey, his relative Matthew Carey, the Abraham Lincoln Morrill Act, the Homestead Act, the Transcontinental Railway, all of this, and then finally the Franklin D. Roosevelt New Deal. It's known sometimes under the heading of Henry Clay's American System. That's the tradition in this country, and if you're a conservative or a traditionalist, you got to be interested in that, and not in some Austrian school of people who essentially a bunch of people writing in favor of the Viennese landlords of the 1920s who didn't like rent control. But what we got to do is bracket that. Now, I'm making clear where my sympathies lie, but the coming into the Philadelphia platform is not determined by that at all, and that's exactly the point. We've got to have a discussion to clarify those issues as we go along. Although, again, I would point to the fact that the dollar crisis, the death agony of the U.S. dollar, is the objective reality really behind a lot of what we see on the surface of things, and we're going to have to get ready to deal with that. But rather than talk about what we cannot agree on at this point, we decided that we would list the 5 points, right? And maybe we just go through a couple of those, huh?
Okay.
Let me start with impeachment. Now, impeachment, of course, is the immediate remedy, and the thing with impeachment that's I think often neglected. Impeachment is a way to prevent the wider war. In other words, if you just leave Bush and Cheney alone, they're not going to go quietly on January 20th, 2009 at 12 noon in Washington, D.C. They're going to start a wider war with Iran, and they may well try to cement themselves in power with a fascist coup d'etat under the cover of a false flag terror event.
And the presidential directive's already been stated.
And we have the continuity of government, and we have all of that put up. And the Democratic Party is worse than pathetic in this regard. Here in Washington yesterday, Cindy Sheehan came to town. I'm very glad Cindy Sheehan has come back to active political participation. I think she's somewhat encouraged by the Philadelphia platform, which came together in response to her call, after all that.
Yeah.
She said, let's gather in Philadelphia on July 4th, and we said, by God, we'll do it. And she was not able to come, but she now has come back, and she's going to declare, I believe today, and she may have already done it, that she's running against Pelosi. Now, Pelosi, of course, the Speaker of the House from Sacramento, California, is a failure. If you're the Speaker of the House, you can block any bill from coming to the floor. And all that needed to happen to end the war in Iraq was not to pass anything. You didn't need to have any votes or any new bill. You just had to have a refusal of the Congress to pass the $100 billion funding bill that Bush demanded, and which then they caved in and gave him. Notice, Pelosi did this in complete bad faith. In her capacity as Speaker of the House, which is what counts, the control of the Congress, she said, okay, Bush's bill with no deadlines and no restrictions and no limits can come to the floor. And then when it did come to the floor, she covered herself by voting against it. But the point is, she's the Speaker of the House. She's not just one wretched little vote on the House floor. She's the person who decided that the bill came to the floor in the first place. So that is no good. Now, worse and worse. When Cindy Sheehan made her march yesterday from Arlington National Cemetery to the U.S. Capitol, she made her way to the office of Congressman John Conyers of Michigan, who is the head of the House Judiciary Committee. That is where impeachment has to start. So Congressman Conyers is the key man. Now, he had said over the weekend, it was reported in various papers, that Conyers had said, if I get 3 more congressmen to sign on the bills of impeachment against Bush Cheney, I will start impeachment hearings.
Wow, he did.
But then he reneged. When Cindy Sheehan got to his office, accompanied by Medea Benjamin and Deborah Sweet and David Swanson and all of the leaders of the peace movement who were there to demand impeachment, Conyers turned around and said, no, I'm not going to lift a finger for impeachment. You should just make sure that you vote the Republicans out and vote more people like me in. And I'm afraid that will not fly, because I don't want more Conyers I don't want more sellouts and traitors and people who are going to take your vote and take your money and then turn around and kick you in the face. I want responsible representatives who are going to respond to the demands of their constituents, and I'm afraid Mr. Conyers has now struck out. So Conyers, just like Pelosi, is somebody who is begging for a primary challenge, at the very least, from somebody who can come into his district and represent what the people really demand. Because if you have any sense at all, you can see middle-class neighborhoods, and I've been in a good 15 states, I would say, in the course of this year. You see impeachment in middle-class neighborhoods all over the United States. You'll see these signs that say, impeach him or impeach both of them. And I've seen that from Dover, New Hampshire, to San Diego, California, and half a dozen places in between. So impeachment is war avoidance. If you don't want World War III, start pinning Bush Cheney down with impeachment. And indeed, one of the topics has to be the misprision of treason on 9/11. Because what we know, we don't need any hearings at all to know that Bush and Cheney presided over the government and this happened, 9/11. And we know that Bush was told at a certain point, the country is under attack, and he never asked. He sat there for 20 minutes. He didn't ask what kind of attack. He didn't give any orders. That's a critical moment where the president has got to spring into action. If you remember the Cold War, you remember that in those days you were thought to have maybe 5 or 10 minutes to give some orders and then get into a helicopter and flee. And Bush did neither one. Let me just also point out, a lot of these people like Gonzalez, right? The Democrats say they don't like Attorney General Gonzalez because of his illegal NSA wiretaps and his violations of federal law. Well, you don't like Gonzalez, impeach him. If you think you're too weak to impeach Bush Cheney, start by impeaching Gonzalez.
That's
right?
a good point, Webster, but they're kicking us out. I am thankful that you were able to respond to the situation with more good thinking and important information and stuff like that.
Okay, remember, end all wars, no to the police-state dictatorship, government by the people, not by cliques of bankers and financiers, 9/11 truth, and for this you should run for office, form a truth squad, call in, take back the airwaves, build the united front, and go to actindependent.org and keep in touch with the Philadelphia platform.
Thanks, Webster.
Okay. Joe, we're trying to respond to the tremendous crisis caused by the massive betrayals of the Democratic Party. And when they were running for office last year, they were broadly hinting that they were going to impeach Bush and Cheney, and they certainly promised that they were going to end the war in Iraq. And they have reneged. They have betrayed their base on those critical issues. And it was already clear to me that we were in a period of party realignment. In other words, every 32, 36, 40 years in this country, there's a crisis of the party system. And sometimes it's neat. Sometimes it's like 1932, when the Republicans turn into the minority and the Democrats become the majority, and it's fairly straightforward, clear cut. But then we've had really messy ones, right, like 1860. And during the 1850s, you have the collapse of the Whigs, you have the rise and fall of the know-nothings, the free soilers come along and disappear. The Republicans finally emerge, but that takes a while. And, of course, in that cycle, you had a little matter of a civil war. And we're now in very, very messy party realignment. It could have been a neat one if the Democrats had not betrayed their own base and their own program, but that is what they've done. And that will only get worse, as far as I can see. And therefore, there's a huge crisis, above all among leftists, I would say, in the peace movement, in the impeachment movement, the anti-globalization, too, to some extent, that the Democrats have essentially become useless. The old quotation, useless, feckless, gutless, spineless, clueless, that's the Democratic Party. So we cannot get enthusiastic about the Democratic Party presidential candidates, because not one of them is qualified to be president. They're all totally incompetent, as far as I can see.
You know, Webster, that brings to my mind your fourth plank, which is rule by the people, not by the money interests. And it occurred to me that the political common denominator of what you're saying is that our government has been corrupted by bribery. And we have a language, a culture that sort of excuses it with polite terms. But they have actually all been bought off, and that's the tragedy?
I think that's a very big part of it. That was the only glimmer in this Democratic Party debate that was held on, the 23rd of July, was when old curmudgeon Gravel, who can't say anything reasonable about anything, he can't pull himself together to say anything about 9/11 in particular, and he's got a crazy tax proposal. But be that as it may, he did point out that the Democratic Party frontrunners are bought and paid for, lock, stock, and barrel, by the worst predatory hedge funds, the Locust Fund, the Jackal Fund, the Vulture Fund, supporting Hillary, Obama, and Edwards. It's notorious. So they're all paid for by Wall Street investment bankers, and as Gravel pointed out, that is what they'll do when they're in office, no matter what they say. Follow the money. It's